Alright, welcome back, Sebastian here. So today I'm going to be doing my preview for the 2025 United States Grand Prix at the Circuit of the Americas. Now I'm looking forward to this weekend quite a bit, as is one of my favorite tracks on the calendar. Pretty cool layout, but it's also a track where you can have a decent amount of wheel-to-wheel racing, and it produces pretty interesting races as well. So first, taking a look at the circuit. 3 sectors, of course, 20 corners and 2 DRS zones, one going down the main straight from turn 20 up to turn 1, and then the second, of course, along the back straight, turns 11 to turns 12. Now, sector 1 is basically the hairpin, uphill hairpin at turn 1, probably the second best overtaking zone around a lap. Of course, after turn 12, which we'll get to in a second, and that leads to this really nice, SS sequence that goes all the way to turn 6, where the corners get increasingly tighter, and eventually you do need to start actually braking as those first couple of sweeps are, flat out in an F1 car. Then you get to sector 2, which again kind of starts 2/3 of the way down those S's. And again, you have a couple of tricky corners, turn 7, 8, 9, and 10, before you get to the hairpin at turn 11. Not an overtaking zone, but really important corner to making sure that you get a good exit out of that corner so that you can overtake the car in front going into turn 12, which basically ends sector 2. Then you get to sector 3, where you have these almost a double hairpin like sequence of turns 13, 14, and 15, which then sets you up for the really long U-shaped corner. Almost should be flat out in an F1 car. And again, you do sometimes see overtaking, maybe not legal overtakes like we saw with Verstappen in 2017, but if you're really ambitious, you can sometimes set up a pass around there. And that basically leaves the penultimate corner, turn 19 and turns 20. Now, some stats about this track. It's 5.513 kilometers, and we're expected to have 56 laps on Sunday. The race lap record is a 1:36.169 set by Charles Leclerc in 2019. So, possibility, I would say that record could be broken, although I think it will really depend on track conditions. And again, because of the unique nature of the circuit, it's very, very bumpy despite the fact it's a purpose-built track, because it was built in a really poor location. It means that the speed of the track basically changes quite a lot from year to year, depending on if it's been resurfaced, how bad the bumps are, and so again, we're going to kind of have to wait and see what the track conditions are like when we arrive this year. Anyway, the average speed of that fastest lap, is 206 kilometers an hour, which ranks only 20th of the 24 tracks on this year's calendar. So again, one of these slower tracks by average speed, and a lot of slow corners like turn 1, turn 11, and then kind of your double hairpin as well will definitely contribute towards that. Downforce rating 0.46, so I would say medium downforce. You definitely need quite a bit going through the high speed corners towards the end of the S's. You need it for going through the U-turn as well, and definitely going through the slow corners as well. But of course, you do want to balance that out and not have too much drag through those 2 long straights. Full throttle 59% of the lap, and corner tendency is high, meaning that there's more high-speed corners and low-speed corners. But when I did this calculation, it includes basically every little, flick going through the S's. And again, a lot of those corners are not braking zones. So if I did this based on braking zones, not just on corners, I think it would probably be a more balanced circuit where you have a pretty even mix of medium high-speed corners and low-speed corners. Now, pole to win ratio is 42%, so a bit on the lower end of the scale, and definitely shows that pole is not the most important around this track. You can definitely win from outside that position. Now, rookie out qualifying percentage is 38%, so again, a bit like Singapore, a bit of a surprise to see it in the top half, despite the fact that it's not a track that the junior categories race at. But again, with Singapore, it is a track in the second half of the calendar, and rookies are a little bit more experienced and therefore a bit more likely to out-qualify their teammates than they are usually in the first half of the season. As this is a purpose-built track, safety car percentage is a little bit lower. It is 42% here. So again, we'll see if we get one this year. First race, 2012, so about 13 years ago roughly. Again, I would say kind of like Singapore, a bit of a modern classic in the fact that I think it's a fan favorite. produces pretty good racing, and it's a track that I hope stays on the calendar for many years to come. Now, tires for this weekend, I was a bit surprised when I saw this, and I had to kind of double check. But the tires are a soft C4, medium C3, and the hard C1. Pirelli basically skipping a step in the Pirelli range, in the range, hoping maybe to spice the action up. We'll see what the result is. When we get to the weather, which I think is going to be in the next slide, we'll see that with some of the temperatures that we're looking at, the C1 tire might struggle quite a lot, and we might have to look at using kind of the softer tires quite a bit more. But I would expect generally two-stop race, two-stop strategy is probably going to be the way to go, especially since overtaking around this track is possible, I would say. Now, weekend schedule, this is a sprint race. I'm looking forward to it, I guess, in the sense that we haven't had a sprint in a while. But again, I'm not expecting big things. I'm kind of just expecting us to be a little bit spoiled for the race result. But the one good news is that the temperatures do vary quite a bit all 3 days. So again, that will, I think with how tight the grid is this year, I do think that will bring a bit of variation to the grid for both the two qualifying sessions and also the sprint and the Grand Prix. So Friday, FP1 12:30 local time with sprint qualifying 4:30 p.m. Expected temperature for the sprint qualifying 32 degrees and mostly sunny. Then we get to Saturday, sprint at noon and qualifying at 4 p.m. with the expected temperature for qualifying 35 degrees, partially sunny, very, very warm temperatures. And I don't know if this race will be it will be determined that will be a heat hazard, which would then require the cooling packs that we saw in Singapore. With these temperatures, especially Friday, Saturday, I think there's definitely a real possibility that could be the case. But I know sometimes the wet bulb temperature, which is what they use to determine that, can be a little bit different than the ambient air temperature. So not entirely sure on that one. But then we move on to last day, Sunday, Grand Prix at 2 p.m. sharp. And expected temperature for the start of the Grand Prix, 28 degrees, which is 7 degrees cooler than qualifying. And the sprint, 7 degrees cooler than qualifying, I should say. Sprint, I think, is probably going to be low 30s, just given when the time of day it is. But still, you do have a little bit of variation there in temperatures, and that can definitely play a role in creating a bit of variation throughout the weekend. Now, taking a look at last year's race, and this was a race that was a 1-2 for Ferrari, very, very different place from where they are this year, of course, with Max Verstappen bringing up the final spot on the podium. Now, of course, this was Liam Lawson's full-time return to F1, replacing Daniel Ricciardo, of course, who had been dropped after the previous round. And of course, he had previously made his F1 debut the year before, kind of standing in for Ricciardo when he was injured, but he was basically kind of brought into the frame to assess for options for the Red Bull seat for 2025 this year. And of course, he did get that Red Bull seat eventually, but didn't go quite so well for him. Now, in the race itself, a bit of a shocker for Lewis Hamilton. He was out at the end of the first lap, a bit of a clumsy spin at the penultimate corner, and that ended his race very, very early. Also, this was the first of 2 races, I would say, where Max Verstappen, I think, pushed the boundaries quite a bit, racing title rival Lando Norris. And this is the first of 2 races. Of course, next time that he did this was the following race in Mexico, which we'll get to next week, as this is the first race of a triple header. But this was a strategy where basically Verstappen's goal was not to get the most points for himself, but to simply reduce Norris's points total by as much as possible. So very, very aggressive move, going after Norris on the first lap of the Grand Prix, caused Norris to lose a whole bunch of positions, and it basically allowed the way for the Ferraris to kind of go ahead. And eventually, I think Norris does eventually get past Verstappen, but he's given a 5-second penalty for basically overtaking Verstappen off track. A bit controversial, I remember that penalty being, and again, he ends up with Norris for 4th, Verstappen 3rd, and that kind of was one of, I would say, 3 races where I think it really kind of put, that's not quite accurate, one of 2 races in this triple header that really put a dent into Norris's title hopes. Other big moments from this race was that it was a pretty lackluster race for Yuki Tsunoda, the driver that was really competing with Liam Lawson for that Red Bull seat. While Lawson got points on his F1 return, Tsunoda had a bit of a clumsy spin at turn 1 and finished well outside the points. I think definitely probably had an impact on Red Bull eventually deciding to go with Lawson for that second seat. But of course, didn't end up meaning a whole lot in the end, as Tsunoda ends up getting promoted to Red Bull before the Japanese Grand Prix this year. And of course, Charles Leclerc went on to win the Grand Prix, massive haul of points for Ferrari, which helped them in their ultimately unsuccessful fight for the 2024 Constructors' Championship. So taking a look at best qualifiers at this track historically, number one is Pierre Gasly, 37% above his career average for percentage of out qualifying his teammate. Median qualifying gap of 0.382 seconds in his favor. Then we get to number two, Carlos Sainz, plus 25%. Median qualifying gap a bit closer though, only 65 hundredths of a second in his favor. And then number three is Alex Albon, plus 8%, with a median qualifying gap of 1.6 tenths of a second. Then when we look at worst qualifiers, number one is Nico Hülkenberg, a bit of a surprise there. Perhaps negative 33% with a median qualifying delta of 57 hundredths of a second against him. And then number two, Yuki Tsunoda, minus 25%, median qualifying gap of pretty woeful, of 4.3 tenths of a second. And then number three is George Russell, negative 15%, median qualifying gap, still in his favor though, of 2.5 tenths of a second in his favor. But again, last time out, Singapore was also a track that Russell definitely had a pretty bad record at historically, and still ended up winning the Grand Prix. So maybe not a big deal for Russell. Now, qualifying predictions for this weekend. The 10 drivers who are predicted to out-qualify their teammates are Norris, Leclerc, Verstappen, Russell, Alonso, Gasly, Behrman, Hadjar, Sainz, and Bortoleto. I would say bit gaps. I would say they're probably not going to be what are written down here. I would say the Norris Piastri gap is probably a little bit bigger than it will end up being. But Norris has been pretty good here at COTA, especially compared to Piastri. So again, I do think that gap's a little bit big, but I wouldn't be surprised if Norris out-qualified Piastri by about a tenth of a second. Other than that, I would say Gasly out-qualifying Colapinto by 4 tenths. Maybe a little bit big there, especially given that Colapinto's out-qualified his French teammate for the last 5 Grand Prix. And then for Bortoleto, Hülkenberg, I think a little bit big in favor of Bortoleto's favor. I think he, still has a good chance of qualifying the Hulk, but I don't think it's going to be about 4 tenths of a second big. Now, finishing up this preview with some predictions for the weekend. Now, I think Red Bull last time out in Singapore, I think did a really good job of making sure they actually beat McLaren at a track that was high downforce. The one difference between Singapore and here is that this is a track where you can actually overtake. So even if both Norris and Piastri have lackluster qualifying, Verstappen starts on pole position. If the McLaren race pace is as superior as we know it can be, I think it's going to be very, very difficult to beat them in the Grand Prix, even if this is a layer that perhaps should be a little bit more favorable than Singapore was. That being said, there are a lot of high-speed corners here, so I'm not entirely sure what's going to happen. But when you look at the temperatures for Sunday are a little bit more reasonable than they are for Saturday. So I think for the sprint, I think McLaren are probably going to do quite well there. But for the Grand Prix, I'm going to go out on a limb, and I am going to predict a Verstappen win here. Don't know how well that's going to go, but I do think McLaren should be pretty strong. And again, really strong race pace in theory. And a track where you can overtake means that they should, in theory, have no problems getting on the podium. And I'm going to put Norris ahead of Piastri, given he generally has a better record here last couple of years compared to his Australian teammates. So there you go. That's my prediction for the podium for the 2025 United States Grand Prix. So thank you so much for watching, and goodbye.